The cafeteria buzzed with the usual noise of clattering trays, gossiping voices, and the occasional burst of laughter that carried across the hall. Students lined up for pizza slices, chicken sandwiches, and soda, while groups crowded around tables that had long been claimed as territories of the school's social map. The jocks sat together near the back, close to the vending machines. The cheerleaders occupied a cluster in the center where everyone could see them, and the quieter kids huddled by the windows. Into this chaotic landscape stepped a new figure, quiet, unfamiliar, and immediately marked as an outsider. Her name was Alara. She carried her tray carefully, her pale fingers gripping the edges so tightly it seemed like she might drop it at any moment. Her long black hair, slightly wavy, spilled over her shoulders and partially hid her face. She wore simple jeans and a plain hoodie that looked like it had seen better days. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, just trying to survive her first week in a school where people's eyes followed her like hawks waiting for prey to stumble. The whispers started before she even reached the center of the cafeteria. "That's the new girl? She came from out of town, right? I heard her dad's in jail." "Nah, I heard she's some kind of freak." It was the kind of idle cruelty that teenagers thrived on, but it carried weight, and Alara could feel it pressing down on her chest as she scanned for an empty table. Unfortunately, her movements caught the attention of 5 boys lounging at the back. They were notorious, not just for their arrogance, but for the way they dominated the school like a pack of predators. Everyone knew their names: Mason, the ringleader with a cruel smirk that never seemed to fade; Troy, bigger than the others, built like he lived in the gym; Kyle, whose laugh sounded more like a bark; Damien, sly and sharp-eyed, always ready to stir trouble; and Jordan, the youngest but desperate to prove himself to the group. Together, they were the cafeteria's nightmare, and Alara had just stepped into their hunting ground. "Look who we have here," Mason said, nudging Troy as his eyes fixed on Alara. "New girl thinks she can sit wherever she wants." Alara froze as their voices grew louder, clearly directed at her. She glanced at the far corner. There was an empty table near the windows. She tried to make her way toward it quickly, but Mason and his crew were already moving, spreading like wolves cutting off a deer. She lowered her gaze, hoping they'd lose interest if she didn't engage, but that hope died when Mason stepped directly in her path. "Where you headed, princess?" He sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. "You don't think you can just walk past us without saying hi, do you?" The other boys circled around her, their bodies forming a wall. Students nearby turned their heads, some whispering, some smirking, none of them moving to intervene. Everyone knew better than to get in the way of Mason's group. Alara kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly around the tray. "I'm just trying to sit down." Kyle chuckled and leaned closer, his voice loud enough for the crowd.
"Ooh, she talks! Look at that!"
New girl's got a voice. Jordan smirked and reached toward her tray, snatching a carton of milk and shaking it threateningly. "Bet she's too scared to even tell us to stop." "Give it back," Alara said softly, her tone firm but quiet. "Or what?" Mason stepped closer, his grin widening. "You gonna cry? Call your mommy." The cafeteria roared with laughter at his words, and feeding his ego. In a sudden motion, Troy slapped the tray from her hands. It crashed to the floor, the sound echoing across the room. Food splattered against the tiles, milk spilled across her shoes, and the hall erupted in gasps and chuckles. Alara stood frozen, her jaw tightening, her eyes lowering to the mess on the ground. The boys surrounded her more tightly now, emboldened by the audience. "Pick it up," Mason ordered, his tone like a king addressing a servant. "Go on. Show us how good you are at cleaning." For a long moment, Alara didn't move. Her fingers twitched at her sides, and a strange silence spread in the circle. Mason tilted his head, confused that she hadn't obeyed. The cafeteria waited too, half expecting her to kneel down in humiliation. But then she lifted her eyes. It wasn't the look of someone broken or defeated. It was a glare, cold, sharp, and so piercing that Mason took an involuntary step back. Her eyes, usually hidden behind her hair, burned with a kind of fury that few had ever seen. The room seemed to shift, the laughter dying down as whispers replaced it. Something about the way she looked at them made even the boldest kids uneasy. "Did you just—" Kyle began, but his words cut off when Alara moved. It was fast, almost too fast for anyone to process. Her foot lashed out, connecting with the chair beside her, sending it skidding across the floor with a metallic screech. It slammed against the far wall with such force that everyone in the cafeteria flinched. Gasps filled the air. She hadn't touched anyone, yet, but the message was clear. "What the hell?" Jordan muttered, his voice shaky. Mason tried to cover his unease with a laugh. "Oh, so the new girl's got a temper. What are you gonna do? Throw furniture at us?" The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Troy lunged forward, shoving her shoulder hard enough to send most people stumbling. But Alara didn't stumble. She pivoted, her hand snapping out to grab the edge of another chair. With a swift, fluid motion that looked practiced, like she'd done this 1,000 times, she swung it up and over. The chair flew through the air, smashing into the table beside them and knocking trays to the floor. Students screamed, jumping out of their seats as chaos erupted. "Holy crap!" someone shouted. Within seconds, the calm cafeteria had turned into a storm. Chairs clattered, tables screeched as they were shoved aside, and Mason's gang suddenly realized they weren't dealing with an ordinary quiet girl. Alara's hoodie slipped slightly off her shoulder as she turned, her movements sharp and controlled, like a fighter who'd been waiting for the right moment to strike. The 5 boys hesitated, exchanging uncertain looks as the crowd's screams mixed with chants. Some kids were shouting for teachers, others yelling, "Fight! Fight!" Mason's smirk faltered as he tried to regain control, but Alara stood tall in the center of the storm, her chest rising and falling steadily. Her eyes locked on him with a fire that made it clear this wasn't over. And in that charged silence, with chairs overturned and students scrambling, everyone in the cafeteria realized one thing: the new girl wasn't the victim. She was the storm.